하겠습니다. 오늘 행사는 한국어와 영어 동시 통역이 제공됩니다. 한국어는 1번 채널 그리고 영어는 2번 채널 이용해 주시면 되겠습니다. 통역 리시버는 현재 앉아 계신 자리에 비치가 되어 있고요. 분실을 방지하기 위해서 이동하실 때는 반드시 자리에 두고 이동을 부탁드리겠습니다. 온라인으로는 동시 통역 자막으로 송출이 되고 있다는 점 역시 참고를 드리겠습니다. 함께 해주고 계신 외국인 참석자분들을 위해서 잠시 안내해 드리겠습니다. For foreign participants, we are offering Korean English translation audio on the Global HR Forum YouTube. 네, 온라인으로 함께하고 계신 분들께서는 이 세션을 시청하고 계신 모습을 촬영해서 SNS에 업로드를 해주시면 추첨을 통해서 소정의 상품 지급을 드리니까요. 여러분 많은 참여를 좀 부탁을 드리겠습니다. 자세한 내용은 화면을 참고해 주시기 바랍니다. 자, 첫 번째 기조 연설 아마 많은 분들께서 기대하고도 기다리고 계실 것 같은데요. 인공지능과 사람의 공존, 앞서 축사에서도 말씀을 해주셨지만 어떤 모습으로 그려갈지 굉장히 또 기대가 됩니다. 첫 번째 기조 연설의 주제는 모두를 위한 AI, 유럽의 미래라는 주제로 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 대담자로 수고해 주실 분은 한승주 아산정책연구원 이사장께서 함께해 주시겠고요. 장클로드 융커 전 유럽연합 집행위원회 위원장께서 연설 함께 해주시겠습니다. 자, 지금 단상에 나와 계신데요. 여러분 따뜻한 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 고맙습니다. 자, 이어서 이사장님 진행을 부탁드리겠습니다.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here and serve as a counterpart to former Commissioner Jean-Claude Juncker, with whom I worked very closely in the course of the Trilateral Commission. It's the first time that we talk virtually through screens and microphones. I also feel very comfortable to be sitting in front of Professor Michael Jordan, partly because of his very famous name, although I'm sure he doesn't play basketball for his profession, but I'm a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley myself, so I feel very comfortable here. So Mr. Juncker has been introduced through the literature, and you know him already. I don't think I'll spend time to introduce his very illustrious background. He will give us his views on the future of human resources through this forum, and after which I will have about 30-minute conversation with him on the basis of what he will have spoken. So may I take this opportunity to invite Mr. Juncker to speak at this point. I hope we have the connection with him right now. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Good morning, Professor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are meeting early in the morning. It must be around 9 o'clock in Seoul. It's 1 o'clock in the morning in Luxembourg and in Europe. So for you, it's an early morning meeting. For me, it's a kind of late night. show. You are fresh, I'm tired, but these are the circumstances we have to deal with. In Europe and in the European Union, we are in the middle of a serious geopolitical, economic, social, and health crisis, because we are hit by this symmetric crisis called corona virus, and this crisis is hitting us, although being a symmetric crisis, in a very unsymmetric way when it comes to the consequences entailed by this health crisis. These asymmetric consequences can be observed worldwide, and they can be observed in Europe. When the crisis started back in February, March, April, the European Union was starting slowly because member states and the European Commission were asking themselves what kind of crisis this COVID-19 crisis could be. The European Union as such doesn't have specific competencies in the domain of public health, which had as a consequence that the 27 member states were reacting not in the same way, but each and every country and each and every government was reacting in a different way, namely and mainly taking national actions instead of trying to take European actions. Things have improved because the Commission took over the leadership in this fight against the virus, and we have received good news today, because as it seems, a very efficient vaccine has been discovered both in Germany and in the US. So we have some hope that we'll find a way out of this disastrous crisis. What we will not repeat is the closure of the borders. The European states did it at the very beginning of the crisis, but this will not be repeated because the coordination mechanism is working in a better way than it did months ago. Then we had to deal with the result of the US elections. You know the result. Not everyone is accepting the result, as it seems, but this is in fact a result which has been welcomed all over Europe, because the unpredictability of President Trump, I had a good relation with him, by the way, has disappeared. And we do think that the new president will treat his colleagues worldwide as allies, because sometimes in Europe we had the impression that Donald Trump did thought that the European Union was an invention against the influence of the United States of America, which clearly was not the fact. We want to be the allies of our American friends in Europe, and we are very attentive to what is happening on a global level. We have a special attention for South Korea. We are close allies when it comes to basic values. We have friendly relations since decades, and I personally had the best relations with your presidents, including the now president. And so I like South Korea very much, because it's a predictable, reliable partner for the Europeans in these difficult times. We are supposed to talk about the impact this result in the US will have on the global scene, meaning by there what kind of consequences will be entailed as far as the relations between the US, China, and maybe Russia are concerned. As you know, we have difficult relations when it comes to trade between the US and the European Union. I was in Washington as a president of the European Commission back in July 2018, trying to convince Donald Trump to not to impose tariffs on European imports to the United States of America. I succeeded because he did respect the arrangements we have found, meaning that no new tariffs should be imposed. Of course, the US imposed tariffs in the very context of the Airbus-Boeing conflict. European Union yesterday imposed retaliatory measures on the US, but I suppose that in the next coming months we'll find a negotiated settlement when it comes to this issue. I don't think that the relations between Washington and Beijing will improve. As far as I know, Joe Biden, and I know him quite well, he has more or less the same approach towards China than President Trump had, because as we Europeans, the US do see the Chinese as a competitor and a rival. We do think in Europe that Chinese are our partners, but mainly our competitors, and we have to behave that way around when it comes to trade talks between China and the European Union. I had 5 or 6 summits over the last 5 years with the Chinese president and the Chinese prime minister. They are behaving increasingly aggressive. As you know your region better, I know, but when it comes to international trade, they don't respect the basic rules. They are not behaving in a proper and fair way, and we have to fight against this approach we don't like, and which is not in the interest of a fair international trade as the one we have between the European Union and South Korea. When it comes to artificial intelligence, I have to say that I'm not a specialist of AI, but there are some elements, nevertheless, I would like to put forward. Nevertheless, the artificial intelligence is without any doubt the biggest technological advance of our time. Unfortunately, the European Union is hopelessly behind in IA development. We are not playing in the same league than the US or China. That's why the European Union decided 1 year ago, and more prominently in recent months, to increase the investment in the sector of artificial intelligence to a total of 20 billion euros per year, which clearly shows that the European Union takes this perspective, the IA perspective, very seriously. The Commission has issued a white paper. This white paper on artificial intelligence was published in February 2020, and what the Commission is aiming is to foster a European ecosystem of excellence and trust in artificial intelligence. And the Commission, together with the Member States, is preparing, as we are now, a proper regulation, a regulation that should be effective, that should not be excessively prescriptive, so that we want to avoid a disproportionate burden for medium and smaller enterprises. But we have, as a European Union, to drive artificial intelligence with strong European market players based on European values and on a sound regulation of risks. So there are many issues on the agenda of the European Union and of the global society, and I'm ready to take your questions with pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very succinct but panoramic view of the world today. You did quite a job at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to keep you up, but also very grateful. On the basis of what you told us, I may ask you a few questions and comments of myself.
Yeah.
I was thinking just a few days ago that I was thinking about the Second World War, which lasted for 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. And the COVID-19, which for all purposes and extents lasted slightly more than 10 months now in earnest. During World War II, for 6 years, 6 million people soldiers died. So it is 1 million a year. During the last 10 months, in 2020, COVID-19 killed 1 million persons. So in terms of the relative calamity scale of the tragedy, it equals the tragedy. And as it continues and even expands, we expect the losses to be more. Now, at the end of the World War II, they created the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations starts by saying that they are creating this organization to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. So we had, even though much shorter, only about a year now, a tragedy which is, at least in terms of the victims, equal to the size of World War II. So other than local efforts, other than WHO that we know of, is there any thoughts among the leaders of the world, especially in Europe, that we need an effort such as the United Nations to end the war for mankind? Is there any movement that will bring peoples, governments of the world together and form an organization to deal with these sanitary health problems that is going to come, and maybe in worse forms because of the ability for these viruses to mutate? Do you have any comments on this, Mr. Juncker?
Yes, I do think that the number of victims, of casualties during the Second World War was higher than you mentioned. If I'm taking European figures, they are by far higher because you have to add to the soldiers who lost their lives also the civil victims, and this leads us to a higher number. But nevertheless, it's for sure that this crisis is the biggest crisis our generations have experienced, because the last big crisis was, as you mentioned, was the Second World War. This was the crisis, the disaster, the tragedy of the lives of our parents. Now we are dealing with this coronavirus crisis, and it's a very serious one. Fortunately, we have learned yesterday that a vaccine is on the way, because this race for a vaccine was overshadowing the first results of the research. Now we have these results, and there is justified hope that this vaccine will be distributed in an equal and proper way at the beginning of next year. Hopefully, this will be the case. As far as the European reaction to the crisis is concerned, I have to say that the European states, those being members of the European Union, plus Switzerland and Norwegia, they have learned their lesson, because we are no longer closing our borders. We are transferring infected people from countries where the instruments of the health instruments are not at the disposal of the hospitals, to other countries where there is a sufficient number of intensive beds. We are, as Europe and via the European Commission, ordering for the 27 member states the vaccine as soon as it will be there, and we are exchanging the results of the different research efforts which are undertaken in different member states. We are convinced as 27 that the domain of public health has to be integrated in the domain of competencies of the European Union. The coronavirus clearly shows that this is an important problem if we want to have everything under control in the next coming decades. So I think that the lesson which can be drawn is that, taken one by one, the 27 member states of the European Union are too weak to deal with this crisis. But if we are standing together, if we are joining our efforts, if we are improving our systems of coordination, and if we are investing the needed amounts in the research, as we are doing for the time being, the European Union probably will come out of this crisis very stronger than it was before.
Thank you very much. President Donald Trump, during his 4-year term, somewhat less than 4 years now, he still has about 70 days to go. But during that period, he committed many, many mischiefs, 3 of which I will mention. One is to take the United States out of WHO. But 2 more important events: he took the United States out of Paris Climate Accord. He also withdrew from the Iran peace agreement. Now, He did that as many European countries, and I think European Union in particular, and many Asian countries objected. Do you think we should urge Mr. Biden and his administration to come back to these agreements? And do you think the United States will react positively to such requests if there is one?
I had heavy debates with Donald Trump when it came to the different issues you are mentioning. It was not easy to discuss these issues with him because he didn't listen, and he was not interested in what others, Asians, South Koreans, Europeans would think on all these the subjects you have mentioned. I remember a G7 meeting when I was discussing with him in Italy, Taormina, this issue, and he told me that he would announce his final decision on the Paris Climate Agreement days later, and he did, and he withdrew from the Paris Agreement, which was a major mistake. And so by withdrawing and by leaving the Paris Agreement, he gave a bad example, mainly to Brazil. President Obama had reached a deal with China and with others in order to convince them to be part of this climate deal we have negotiated in Paris. And I hope that President Biden will rejoin the Paris Agreement. According to my informations, he will do that. And I think he has publicly announced in recent days that he will join the Paris Agreement once again. Another major mistake is the WTO approach President Trump had chosen, because we need the WTO as a multilateral organization dealing with trade issues, because we cannot accept that one country is fixing the rules and that all the other countries have to follow the rules. So we need this WTO institution and organization, and mainly we need the mediation system, this cour d'arbitrage the WTO has developed. And so therefore I do think that President Biden will act in the direction of common sense.
Well, we hope that somehow normalcy, the new normal, will be really more normal than it has been so far during the past 3-4 years. Now, neither of us, you and me, are experts on the issue of artificial intelligence, but we do know, I think, that artificial intelligence, and I think Professor Jordan later will tell us about this, require much more energy than non-artificial intelligence. And that energy has to come from somewhere, whether it comes from fossil energy, renewable energy such as wind and solar, or nuclear energy. But the trend has been in Europe and even in Korea to phase out from the nuclear energy area? And how do we fill the gap, in fact, as we will increasingly increase the need and demand for energy? We are reducing the sources of energy, and we are watching with great interest, particularly Germany, as it tries to do away with nuclear power centers. And I would like to ask you how Europe is coping with this dilemma, and how what are the plans to fill the gap in the future?
We can see a mixed picture in Europe when it comes to the energy mix. There are countries, you mentioned Germany, who are phasing out from the nuclear energy. Others are following this movement, Belgium and so on and so forth. But others, Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, they are building new power stations. So you don't have a unique tendency in Europe when it comes to nuclear energy. Of course, everyone is focusing on the renewable energies, and the European member states are making a huge progress in that respect. But there too, the European Union has no real competence when it comes to the energy mix, because member states are in charge of their own energy mix without having to take into consideration what the other member states are doing. France, for instance, is a state, a nation, where nuclear energy is a very high ranking source of energy, whereas Germany is doing exactly the opposite after the nuclear accident our Japanese friends have experienced years ago. So I think that we have, as Europeans, to invest high amounts of money into the renewable energy. That's what we are doing. You know, the European Union has decided a kind of recovery plan after the coronavirus crisis, in order to allow the European economy to rebound from the deep we are in for the time being. This is a program of 750 billion of euros, and 30% of this amount is dedicated to climate change. So we know what we have to do, but I would like to say that there is no singular way to deal with that problem. Successes have different origins, and renewables, without any doubt, are the most promising avenue we can see.
Thank you. Ivo Daldar, our mutual friend, who is president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, wrote a book entitled The Empty Throne, meaning the United States has abdicated from the throne position and there is no leadership in the world. Now, Mr. Trump has been defeated in the last election, even though he doesn't seem to accept it. It will be inevitable that he will someday, sooner than later, leave the White House and not be president of the United States. Now, the question I have is, do we need to fill this gap, empty throne? Somebody has to sit on it. Will the United States return to that position? And whether it tries to do that or not, what will be the European role and position in the geopolitical power configuration of the world, not only in the world general, not only in Europe, but in the world in general, including China in this regard?
I do think that President Biden will increase the influence of the United States of America because he will use other instruments than those having been used by Donald Trump. He is more in favor of multilateralism than President Trump was. That's not really a performance because it's easy to be more multilateral than President Trump, but I know Joe Biden quite well so that I can say that he will be more favorable when it comes to the multilateral approach. Given that, and given the fact that this helps to increase and to broaden the global influence of the United States, he is not really sitting on this empty throne, because if you are in favor of a multilateral approach, you don't need a throne for one single person. I think that the UN system has a bigger role to play when it comes to global affairs. I'm saying this without any kind of naivety, but I do think that in this world of today, the world and the planet cannot be run by only one or two or three countries. The European Union has to take care of its own destiny. We were used to a world, a simple world, an easy world to deal with, where the US were protecting the European Union and the European continent. This is over. These are tempi passati. The European Union has to invest in its own defense. My commission launched a European Defense Fund. So we launched different initiatives related to defense in order to help us to overcome the difficulties we were experiencing during Donald Trump's time. And this international role of the European Union has to be supported by new decision-making process. When it comes to foreign affairs, the European Union is acting by unanimity. We have to act in the future by taking our decisions by qualified majority. And we have to define the place the European Union will occupy in the world between China, Russia being our immediate neighbor, and US. We will stay allies, remain allies of the United States of America, and we'll have sorry, to deal with China in a less naive way, because China is not respecting the trade rules. The Chinese companies are investing everywhere in European companies and in European countries, whereas European businesses, they have only a limited access to the internal market in China. So we'll have, I think, better relations between the US and the European Union. The European Union will focus on its international network, including, of course, South Korea, which South Korea being one of our main partners and strategic partners in the world, and we'll have a less naive approach when it comes to China.
Well, thank you very much. Getting slight pressure or nudging to talk more about artificial intelligence in our discussion. The question that I've had is, if there is some difference in the way that different worlds, different cultures deal with artificial influence. Of course, with or without respect for intellectual property rights, China has been making enormous progress. So has Japan been making it, and South Korea is catching up in the artificial intelligence area. And is there something in the Asian culture, especially Northeast Asian culture, that is more compatible with artificial intelligence or not? Even in dealing with the coronavirus, I think we've been talking about some cultural differences between the East and West, and how effectively or less effectively they deal with this virus. Do you have any thoughts on the different ways that the society is run, that human relationships operate in dealing with artificial intelligence, which is something new?
Yes, I'm admiring the Asian people very much, because Asians are by far more flexible than Europeans. They can adapt to new realities, whereas Europeans are lazy when it comes to adapt to new realities. Keynes said, if facts are changing, I'm changing my mind. What do you do, sir? Europeans are very slow when it comes to changing their minds, and there our Asian friends are giving us the best lesson you can imagine. And then the South Koreans are not infected in the same way by the COVID-19 virus than Europeans, because I think that the Koreans are dealing with this crisis in a more intelligent way, and they are more respectful for their neighbors, and they are taking care of the others in the street and in the plant and at home, whereas Europeans are by far more egoistic than the South Koreans are. And people in South Korea, as far as I know them, and I know them well, and I have many South Korean friends, they are attracted by a no-nonsense policy, and they are down to earth. So the European Union and Europeans can learn a lot from our Asian friends.
Well, we have our own share of trouble sometimes. Bus drivers are attacked because he asked passengers to wear masks, for example. But we have less of that conflict here than certainly in the United States. In the United States, in the name of freedom, people would like to keep the freedom not to wear masks. They also, in the course of demanding their freedom to wear masks, they also want to maintain the freedom to spread the virus. And so it is of course, rather paradoxical philosophy and attitude. And there is a little bit of collectivistic mentality, I think, among East Asians, which makes the implementation or enforcement of mandates such as wearing masks easier in this part of the world than elsewhere. And in that regard, probably there will be, for the time being, until artificial intelligence becomes much more intelligent than human intelligence, then I think there will be less resistance in Asia than in Europe or in the United States. We can't end this discussion without talking about something about Korea. And rather than asking you about what you think will happen in the Korean Peninsula, I'll give you some thoughts about what I think and get your view on this. If I say that the North Korean nuclear issue and the way we deal with it will be different after Trump is gone from when he was the president. For Mr. Trump, everything was politics. Everything was geared to enhancing his chances of getting reelected in the November 2020 election. And so, in order to get the trophy of a deal, whatever it is, he was willing to befriend Kim Jong-un. He even claimed that they were lovers. And he actually made certain concessions, some known to his own allies, including the United States, some not even known to his own generals and his own officials, subordinates. And so it was while Trump was the president, American president, North Korea and Kim Jong-un were able to manipulate the United States by appearing to be doing certain favors, and Trump going along doing what he thinks he is at his best, that is, make a deal. Now, after he's gone, I think the new administration probably will not be the same as before. We came from the Bush administration to Obama administration, and then Trump administration. But even the Democratic administration was much more realistic, not hardline, but balanced in dealing with carrots and sticks. So there will be more sticks than carrots, and certainly North Korea will not be able to take advantage of an American president's preoccupation with his political interests. So we are looking for, of course, the Koreans, South Koreans, are their number one interest is what is going to happen to North Korean nuclear weapons. How strong is the European countries, EU's interest, concern about nuclear proliferation, especially in the area of the Korean Peninsula, and what is your prognosis?
I do think that President Trump was badly advised when he was trying to make a deal with the dictator in the north of the peninsula, because as he always wants to make a deal, he was trying to negotiate a deal with Kim in the same way he is trying to conclude deals with the allies of the United States of America. But there is no parallel between an ally, a confirmed ally of the United States of America, and the North Korean regime. And the reality is, the fact is, that the meetings he had with the dictator and the efforts the American administration was paying, they have led to no result at all. There is nothing has been achieved during the Trump administration when it comes to the situation in North Korea. I do think that the fight against this uncontrolled proliferation of nuclear weapons is of the essence if we want to prepare the future in the best way possible. And I do think that the North Korean regime is still a threat to the peace, not only in the region, but to international peace in the very same way. So I'm convinced that President Biden will be less naive, will choose a more structured approach when it comes to direct negotiations, if ever, between the United States of America and North Korea. The mistake of Trump was to give to the North Korean dictator a too big role.
Well, that was a very sober and realistic analysis of what is happening and what is likely to happen, and a very appropriate ending of our discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Juncker. Hope to see you again, this time virtually, but next time in real terms. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I would like to say, man, no, I'm going to bed.
네, 여러분 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. Thank you very much. 네, 좌장으로 또 수고해 주신 이사장님께도 여러분 다시 한번 감사 인사 부탁드리겠습니다. 고맙습니다. 네, 단상 아래 자리로 천천히 모시겠습니다. 자, 저희 기조연설 모두를 위한 AI라는 주제로 또 유럽의 미래 짚어봤죠. 이번 포럼의 첫 번째 기조연설도 수고를 해주셨는데요. 두 분께서 이 다채로운 시각으로 현안들 하나하나도 짚어주셨습니다. 빠르게 변화하고 있는 사회에서 인공지능이 어떻게 또 성장하고 적용되고 있는지, 또 모두를 위한 AI는 그렇다면 어떤 가치를 갖고 있는지 짚어볼 수 있었던 굉장히 의미 있는 시간이었던 것 같습니다. 자, 장클로드 융커 위원장님 그리고 한승주 이사장님께 다시 한번 감사 인사드리겠습니다. 고맙습니다.